Imagine this. A successful lawyer, David Lewis, found dead in his car on a rural road in Amarillo, Texas. Authorities ruled it an accident, but everything about his death screams foul play. Unexplained bruises, strange chemical traces, and a mysterious scent of gasoline. These were just a few of the oddities that didn't add up. Was David murdered to silence him? And if so, why has his case been covered up for decades? Dive into the chilling story of a legal battle that may have cost him his life, and the conspiracy that's still trying to keep the truth hidden. Stay with us to uncover the mystery behind the strange. Death of David Lewis. On January 11, 1994, the body of 40-year-old David Lewis, an accomplished lawyer from Amarillo, Texas, was found under suspicious circumstances. His death, initially ruled an accident, has baffled investigators and family members ever since. David had been a well-respected figure in his community, known for his intelligence and legal acumen. But his untimely death would soon raise more questions than answers. David was no ordinary man. He had a reputation as a highly skilled lawyer, specializing in corporate and criminal law. His career had been flourishing, and he had recently been involved in several high-profile cases. Outside of his professional life, David was a devoted father and a loving husband to his wife, Karen. The couple had 2 young children, and David's life seemed to be on a steady, upward trajectory. There was no sign of any impending trouble, no indication that anything could derail his promising future. But on that fateful night, everything changed. David's body was discovered in his car on the side of a rural road just outside Amarillo. The car's engine was running, and the vehicle's headlights were on, casting an eerie glow in the darkness. David was found slumped over the wheel, and at first glance, it appeared to be a tragic case of accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. The authorities ruled his death an accident and closed the case. However, as time passed, several strange details began to emerge, leading to growing suspicions that foul play might have been involved. David's wife, Karen, was the first to question the official narrative. She knew her husband well. He was not the type to take his own life, and there were no signs of suicidal tendencies in his behavior. David had been in high spirits leading up to his death, with no indication that he was in any kind of distress. Furthermore, Karen was puzzled by the fact that David had no obvious signs of physical injury. If his death had been caused by carbon monoxide poisoning, why had he not exhibited the typical symptoms of poisoning, such as confusion or gasping for air? The timeline surrounding David's final hours is also full of inconsistencies. According to official reports, David had left his office in Amarillo around 9 p.m. on the night of his death. He had been working late, finishing up some paperwork for a major case. His colleagues noted that he had been in a good mood that evening and had even made plans to meet with friends the following week. He was last seen leaving the office, and no one had seen or heard from him after that. It was until the next morning that his body was discovered on the side of the road. The authorities initially considered the possibility of carbon monoxide poisoning given the circumstances. David was found in the car with the engine running and the windows closed. However, the autopsy revealed that the levels of carbon monoxide in his blood were relatively low for a person who had supposedly been exposed for several hours. If carbon monoxide poisoning had been the cause of death, the levels in his system should have been much higher. This anomaly immediately raised suspicions about the accuracy of the original ruling. The forensic investigation uncovered several oddities that didn't fit with the story of a simple accident. For one, David's clothing appeared to have been tampered with. A forensic analysis of his clothes revealed traces of an unknown chemical substance. The chemical did not match any known toxins, and its origin could not be identified. Furthermore, David's clothing appeared to have been intentionally removed or shifted in an unusual way, suggesting that he may have been moved after death. Another strange detail was the presence of bruising on David's neck. While these injuries were not severe enough to suggest foul play, they were not consistent with the idea of accidental death. The bruising suggested that David may have been strangled or restrained at some point before his death. There was also a lack of defensive wounds on his body, which led some to believe that David may have been caught off guard and incapacitated by someone. Additionally, thorough examination of the vehicle's interior uncovered another disturbing finding: a faint but unmistakable smell of gasoline. No one had been able to explain why David's car smelled of fuel, especially given that the car's gas tank appeared to be intact. The authorities quickly dismissed this detail, but Karen believed it was too significant to ignore. Could it have been possible that David's death was staged to look like an accident, with gasoline being used to cover up other traces of foul play? As the investigation into David's death progressed, several theories began to emerge. The most prominent theory was that David had been murdered, possibly by someone close to him. Given the mysterious bruising on his neck, the tampered clothing, and the unexplained chemical traces, many believed that David had been incapacitated before being placed in his car and left to die. Some speculated that David's involvement in high-profile legal cases might have made him a target of those seeking to silence him. Another theory suggested that David's death was the result of a botched robbery, the fact that he had been in the process of working on a major case involving corporate corruption led some to wonder whether he had been targeted by criminals seeking to eliminate him as a threat. However, there was no evidence of theft, and the car was found intact, ruling out this theory for many. A third, more disturbing theory posited that David's death had been part of a larger conspiracy, one that involved powerful people who sought to silence him. David had been a vocal advocate for justice and had made enemies in the legal and business worlds. Was it possible that his death was orchestrated by a group with the resources and motive to make it look like an accident? Were they able to manipulate the evidence to ensure that the investigation went in the wrong direction? Despite all the evidence suggesting foul play, the official ruling on David's death remained an accident. The authorities closed the case, citing the lack of concrete proof to suggest otherwise. However, Karen, along with a few other concerned individuals, refused to let the case go. They continued to push for answers, gathering information, and conducting their own investigations. Over the years, new pieces of evidence continued to emerge, but they were always dismissed or ignored by the authorities. Today, David's death remains one of the most puzzling and unresolved mysteries in Texas history. With no official answers and growing suspicions about a possible cover-up, the truth about what really happened to David Lewis continues to elude those who seek justice for him. Why, after so many years, are the files surrounding his death still sealed? Why was a case with so many red flags closed without further investigation? Could there be a larger conspiracy at play here, one that's still being concealed to this day? What secrets are being kept from the public, and why? As the mystery of David Lewis's death lingers, so does the unsettling feeling that there is much more to this case than anyone is willing to admit. Until the truth comes to light, the questions remain, and the answers seem farther out of reach than ever before. As the years passed, the case of David Lewis's mysterious death continued to fade from the public eye. However, Karen, his widow, never gave up on uncovering the truth. She remained steadfast in her pursuit of justice, constantly questioning the official narrative. But despite her efforts, it became increasingly clear that forces beyond her control were at play. Karen's determination led her to delve deeper into David's life, particularly his professional career, hoping to uncover clues that might point to why someone would want him dead. What she discovered sent chills down her spine. David had been involved in several high-profile legal cases, particularly those dealing with corporate fraud and corruption. He had represented clients who were entangled with powerful business leaders, some of whom had been linked to shady dealings. There were rumors swirling about David's role in a particular case, a case so controversial that it made him enemies in high places. But despite the public nature of his work, there were no clear threats or direct indications that David had been in danger. Yet, as Karen spoke with colleagues and acquaintances who had worked with David, one name kept surfacing, someone David had crossed paths with during his legal battles. This individual, a high-ranking executive in a multinational corporation, had recently come under investigation for embezzlement and fraud. The case had been going poorly for the executive, with David representing the opposing side. Could this individual have played a role in David's untimely death? Is this a case of a powerful figure silencing someone who threatened to expose them? The more Karen investigated, the more connections she uncovered. She learned that David had recently received several strange phone calls in the weeks leading up to his death. Some of these calls were threatening, while others were cryptic in nature. However, Karen had no way of tracking the calls, as the records had mysteriously disappeared. She also found out that David had been meeting with an unknown person late in the evening on the night of his death, though no one knew the identity of this individual. The meeting seemed unusual to those who knew David. Despite Karen's attempts to speak with investigators, the case remained firmly closed. And the authorities were unwilling to entertain the idea that David's death was anything but an accident. The lack of support from law enforcement only fueled Karen's belief that there was more to her husband's death than met the eye. In 1997, 3 years after David's death, Karen received a tip from an anonymous source. The individual claimed to have information regarding David's final moments, suggesting that the death had indeed been a carefully orchestrated murder. The informant said that there were witnesses who had seen David's car on the night of his death, but the authorities had ignored their testimonies. According to the tip, David had been followed that evening by a black SUV. The vehicle's occupants were never identified. Karen couldn't shake the feeling that this could be the break she had been waiting for. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to foul play, no further action was taken. The case remained closed, and Karen was left with more questions than answers. Why was no one investigating the possibility that David had been murdered? What was the reason for the authorities' reluctance to take a closer look at the case? Was there a cover-up to protect the powerful individuals who may have been responsible for his death? As Karen continued her search for the truth, she stumbled upon yet another piece of troubling information. In 2001, during an unrelated investigation into corporate corruption, it was discovered that the same multinational corporation that David had been challenging was involved in a complex web of illegal activities. The company had used its influence to silence potential whistleblowers. An evidence surfaced suggesting that they had taken drastic measures to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to their operations. Could David have been one of their victims? At the same time, a new theory emerged that seemed to align with some of the anomalies found in the case. Some experts began to speculate that David's death may have been the result of a botched attempt to intimidate him. The presence of the bruising on his neck and the mysterious chemical traces found on his clothing suggested that he may have been restrained or drugged before being left in the car. Could it have been that David's death was not meant to be fatal, but something went wrong during the process? As Karen pursued these leads, she uncovered even more inconsistencies. Records that had been previously sealed were suddenly made available to her, and they revealed several key pieces of evidence that had been dismissed by the original investigators. For instance, a former colleague of David's came forward and admitted that David had once confided in him about being followed by unknown individuals. But at the time, no one took his concerns seriously. Karen also discovered that David's law firm had been under pressure in the weeks leading up to his death. Documents showed that there had been subtle hints of threats being made toward the firm, but nothing substantial enough to warrant a formal investigation. These revelations only deepened her conviction that David's death was not an accident. Yet, despite all the evidence Karen had uncovered, the case remained cold. Authorities refused to reopen the investigation, and the media quickly moved on, leaving David's story in the shadows of history. In 2005, Karen took the bold step of hiring a private investigator to uncover what had happened to her husband. After months of digging, the investigator found a disturbing pattern. Several key figures in David's life, including colleagues and business partners, had been intimidated into silence. Some of these individuals had even left the country or gone into hiding. Was this a coordinated effort to bury the truth about David's death? Investigators' findings, along with the new evidence Karen had gathered, led to a renewed push for a public inquiry into David's death. But the road ahead was not easy. The case was fraught with obstacles, and it seemed as though the people responsible were going to great lengths to prevent the truth from coming out. Why, after so many years, has the case not been solved? Why was crucial evidence ignored, and why was the investigation closed so abruptly? Could David's death have been the result of a cover-up involving powerful individuals who still control the narrative to this day? Karen's fight for justice continues, and the truth remains elusive. But one thing is certain: David Lewis's death is a mystery that will not be forgotten. The unanswered questions continue to haunt his family. And as long as the case remains unsolved, the suspicion of a cover-up will linger. As the years go by, the case of David Lewis serves as a reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, and some truths may never come to light. But until that day comes, the quest for justice remains. Despite the ongoing silence from authorities and the gradual fading of interest from the media, Karen's quest for justice became a mission that would consume her life. Over time, she began reaching out to legal experts and former investigators who had worked on similar cases, hoping to find someone who would take her husband's case seriously. In 2009, after years of painstaking research, Karen finally found an ally, a retired federal investigator named Thomas. Bradford had worked on a variety of high-profile corporate cases throughout his career, and he was one of the few individuals willing to take a fresh look at David S.'s case. Bradford, intrigued by the potential cover-up, agreed to re-examine the details of the investigation. What he uncovered during his review was both disturbing and alarming. Bradford quickly realized that the initial investigation into David's death had been shockingly incomplete. Several key pieces of evidence had been either ignored or mishandled. Most notably, Bradford discovered that the forensic team had failed to test the unusual chemical traces found on David's clothing against known industrial chemicals. This critical mistake left a significant hole in the investigation. The substance found on David's clothes was later identified as a rare chemical used in the manufacturing of industrial products specifically. The kind of product that was known to be manufactured by companies that had business dealings with the corporate giants David had challenged in his legal career. What was even more troubling was the discovery that David had been involved in an ongoing legal battle with one of these companies. Bradford's investigation revealed that David had recently filed a complaint about unethical practices and had uncovered several pieces of evidence linking the corporation to illegal activities. In light of this, it seemed increasingly plausible that David's death was not just a random accident or a case of personal distress, but rather an execution carried out to silence him and protect corporate interests. The more Bradford dug into David's life, the more connections he uncovered between David's work and a powerful network of individuals with influence in both the corporate and political spheres. These individuals had the means to cover their tracks and ensure that their actions were never questioned. Bradford, however, was not intimidated by their power. He began compiling evidence, preparing to confront the institutions that had failed to provide justice for David. However, the deeper Bradford went, the more he realized just how dangerous his investigation had become. Strange things began happening. Files went missing. Witnesses who had previously been willing to speak started retracting their statements, and Bradford himself began receiving anonymous threats. It was clear that the people involved in David S.'s death were aware of the renewed investigation and were doing everything they could to shut it down. In 2011, Bradford received a mysterious phone call. The voice on the other end of the line was masked, but the message was clear. Stop looking into David Lewis. Some things are better left buried. It was the final warning. Bradford knew that he had touched a nerve and that his continued investigation could have dangerous consequences. Despite the threats, Bradford pushed forward. He and Karen, who had become increasingly involved in the investigation, decided to take their findings to the public. They presented a detailed report to several media outlets, hoping that public exposure would force the authorities to reopen the case. But even with mounting evidence, the response from law enforcement was underwhelming. Once again, the investigation stalled, and it became painfully clear that there was a concerted effort to suppress the truth. As Karen and Bradford's investigation reached a boiling point, they began to wonder whether the conspiracy surrounding David's death ran deeper than they had originally imagined. Could the very institutions that were supposed to protect justice have been complicit in silencing David? And if so, what could be the extent of the corruption and cover-up? In 2013, Karen and Bradford were approached by an anonymous source who claimed to have further evidence regarding David's death. This source, who had worked closely with one of the executives David had been challenging, provided Karen and Bradford with a series of documents. These documents indicated that the corporation had indeed been involved in illegal activities, including bribery, fraud, and corporate espionage. The source claimed that David had unknowingly stumbled upon a larger, more dangerous operation, one that made him a target for elimination. The documents revealed that David had been actively gathering evidence to expose the company's wrongdoing, and that his work had made him a serious threat to their operations. It seemed as though David's death had been orchestrated to prevent him from going public with his findings. The more Karen and Bradford examined these documents, the clearer it became. David had died not because of an accident, but because he had been targeted by powerful individuals who were determined to keep their secrets hidden. As they delved deeper into the corporate connections tied to David's death, Karen and Bradford began to understand the scale of the conspiracy that surrounded the case. Not only had David been targeted because of his legal work, but his death had been covered up by a series of well-placed individuals who had access to law enforcement and the media. The silence that had surrounded his death was not a coincidence. It was part of a deliberate effort to protect the powerful forces that had been behind the events leading to his tragic end. Despite the mounting evidence, the fight for justice for David continued to face insurmountable challenges. With every piece of evidence Karen and Bradford uncovered, it seemed that more obstacles were placed in their way. The higher the stakes, the greater the risks they faced, and as the conspiracy grew more complicated, they realized that the truth might never see the light of day, unless it could break through the layers of deception and corruption that had been put in place to protect those responsible. Why, after so many years, does the case remain unsolved? Why was the evidence ignored? And why are key pieces of the puzzle still missing? What forces are at play, and who stands to gain from keeping David's death a secret? The more Karen and Bradford uncovered, the more questions arose. They had uncovered a massive web of deceit, but the truth still seemed out of reach. And as long as those in power continued to protect their interests, David's death will remain a chilling reminder of the dangers of uncovering too much. Could the case ever be reopened? Will the truth about David Lewis's death finally come to light? Or will the conspiracy continue to control the narrative, leaving Karen and those who seek justice fighting an uphill battle against the forces working to keep the truth buried? Until then, the mystery of David Lewis's death remains unsolved, and the questions continue to echo. What happened to David Lewis? And why was his death hidden behind a wall of secrecy? Only time will tell if the truth will ever be revealed. As Karen and Bradford continued their search for the truth, the pressure mounted. In 2015, after years of frustration and unanswered questions, Karen took an unprecedented step. She reached out to federal authorities, hoping that a higher level of investigation would yield the breakthrough they desperately needed. She had gathered evidence, witness statements, and documents that pointed to a conspiracy, one that reached far beyond local law enforcement. At first, the federal authorities were hesitant to get involved, citing the closed nature of the case and the overwhelming lack of concrete evidence. But Karen's persistence paid off. In a meeting with the FBI, Karen and Bradford laid out their findings, including the mysterious chemical traces found on David's clothing and the circumstantial evidence that suggested foul play. The FBI, having dealt with high-level corporate crimes before, seemed intrigued. After all, the connections between David's legal work and the major corporation were too coincidental to ignore. The investigation reopened, but this time, the stakes were higher. With federal agents involved, the secrecy surrounding the case grew even more intense. As the investigation progressed, new witnesses began to come forward, individuals who had been afraid to speak out previously, but now felt compelled to tell the truth. One witness revealed that David had mentioned feeling like he was being watched in the weeks leading up to his death. He had confided in this person that he suspected someone was trying to intimidate him into dropping his case against the corporation. These new testimonies brought fresh hope to Karen and Bradford, but it also uncovered a chilling reality. The corporate executives involved in the conspiracy were not just using influence in the legal world, but were deeply connected to powerful political figures. The investigation led to a series of dead ends, as witnesses who had previously been willing to cooperate started backing out, and evidence continued to disappear or be tampered with. The deeper they dug, the more they realized how much was at stake. In 2017, a breakthrough came when Bradford stumbled upon a set of internal emails from within the corporation David had been targeting. These emails, obtained from a whistleblower inside the company, contained discussions about silencing individuals who threatened to expose their illegal activities. It was clear that David had been on their radar, and the emails suggested that those in charge had given explicit instructions to handle him. Though the emails were heavily redacted, there was enough information in them to indicate that David had not been an accidental casualty of corporate corruption, but a deliberate target. However, despite the mounting evidence and the testimonies that came forward, law enforcement continued to stall, dragging their feet and bringing the case to any sort of conclusion. The executives involved, though under investigation, had the resources and connections to delay the process indefinitely. It became clear that the power dynamics at play in this case were too complex for simple justice to prevail. The legal system, it seemed, was compromised in ways Karen and Bradford had never anticipated. With the FBI investigation facing constant setbacks, Karen and Bradford began to realize that they might never get the full story from official sources. The case had grown so tangled with corruption and influence that it seemed unlikely any real justice would come from within the existing systems. But they were not ready to give up. They turned their attention to the media, hoping to apply public pressure that might finally force the authorities to take action. In 2018, Karen and Bradford took their story to a well-known investigative journalist who had previously covered corporate scandals and government corruption. The journalist, intrigued by the evidence they presented, agreed to investigate further. As the story started to make waves in the media, Karen began receiving anonymous threats once again, this time more direct and ominous. "Stop talking, or it won't just be you left in the dark," one message read. But Karen was undeterred. She knew the stakes, and she was determined to keep fighting for the truth, no matter the cost. As the story gained traction, the media began investigating the connections between David's death and a series of similar cases involving corporate whistleblowers who had mysteriously died or disappeared under suspicious circumstances. It appeared that David was not the only one to be silenced in this way. The more the media uncovered, the clearer it became that David's death was part of a larger pattern of corporate intimidation and cover-up. Despite the mounting evidence and the growing public attention, the investigation remained frustratingly stalled. Legal experts began to question the integrity of the original investigation, especially the fact that crucial pieces of evidence had been overlooked or suppressed. Even the key forensic anomalies, the strange chemical traces on David's clothing, the bruising on his neck, and the unexplained gasoline smell in his car were downplayed in the official report. How many times had similar cases been ignored or swept under the rug? By 2020, the case had gained a significant following online, and with amateur sleuths and legal analysts offering their own theories and pointing out discrepancies in the investigation, social media campaigns dedicated to seeking justice for David began to spread across platforms, keeping the case alive in the public consciousness. Karen had become a symbol of resilience, a mother and wife who would not let her husband's death be forgotten. The media pressure reached new heights in 2021 when a second whistleblower came forward this time, a former executive from the corporation that had been linked to David's legal cases. This executive provided a critical piece of evidence, a signed document that detailed a plan to intimidate and eventually eliminate those who posed a threat to the company's secrecy. It was damning, and it brought renewed attention to the case. The whistleblower's testimony confirmed what Karen had long suspected. David had been murdered to protect the corporation's interests. Despite this breakthrough, the legal battle continued. With the corporation fighting tooth and nail to prevent any real consequences, the executives involved in David's death were still free, and the authorities had yet to take decisive action. The case had now become a symbol of the deep corruption within the system, where powerful people could manipulate the system to avoid accountability. Karen, however, was not backing down. She knew that the fight for justice for David was bigger than just her. It was about exposing the power structures that allowed people to disappear, to be silenced, and to be forgotten. In 2022, Karen and Bradford made a final push to the public, releasing all their findings, including the new whistleblower testimony, to the media, and demanding that the authorities reopen the investigation. But as of now, the truth remains just out of reach. Why, after so many years, has justice not been served? Why are the powerful individuals behind David's death still walking free? And why do the systems designed to protect the innocent seem to be protecting those who commit these heinous acts? The unanswered questions hang in the air, just as David's story still lingers in the hearts of his loved ones. As Karen's fight continues, the world watches, waiting to see if the truth will finally come to light. As Karen's relentless pursuit for justice continues, the mystery surrounding David's death remains unresolved. Despite overwhelming evidence of foul play and mounting public pressure, the corporation responsible and the individuals involved remain unpunished. The deeper Karen and Bradford dug, the more they realized just how powerful the forces protecting those responsible truly were. The cover-up had reached all levels of society, from law enforcement to powerful corporate leaders, making it nearly impossible for any real justice to be served. The case has now become more than just the tragic death of one man, Nit, a symbol of the corruption, deceit, and manipulation that runs deep within powerful institutions. David's death, whether caused by corporate greed, intimidation, or a calculated murder, remains one of the most haunting, unsolved mysteries. The unanswered questions will continue to haunt his family and those who refuse to believe that the truth should remain buried. But Karen's journey isn't over yet. She remains resolute in her fight for justice. Knowing that David's story is bigger than her family alone, Essa, a story of those who have been silenced, the victims of powerful forces that go unchallenged. And though the road ahead is uncertain, Karen will continue to fight, knowing that every step she takes brings her closer to the truth, no matter the cost. Asterisk, asterisk, if you found this case as disturbing and complex as we did, make sure to like, comment, and share this video with others who are interested in uncovering the truth behind unsolved mysteries. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping, real-life stories that expose corruption, mystery, and untold secrets. But before you go, we've got something even more chilling lined up for you. What if one of the most powerful families in America was behind an unsolved case, and no one ever knew? Stay tuned to our channel, and you won't believe what we're uncovering next. Hit that notification bell. And watch our next video to dive deeper into another mystery that could change everything you thought you knew.